Hello and welcome to the Crimson Stitchery, a video channel about making all things beautiful and useful. My name is Anushka. You can find me elsewhere online as the Crimson Stitchery. I'm on Instagram and I also have a Ravelry group for this YouTube channel. This video is coming to you guys courtesy of all of my lovely and wonderful supporters over on Patreon who are keeping my YouTube channel alive through monthly subscriptions in exchange for a whole bunch of bonus content. So if that appeals to you, if you enjoy the Crimson Stitchery or if you just want to explore it a bit more, do head over to patreon.com/thecrimsonstitchery to find out more about what's involved and choose the right tier for you. I hope that you're well. I'm currently recording from a very, very soggy and wet July afternoon. Luckily we haven't experienced the flooding that other people I hear in England have been. And I'm sitting here with a pot of coffee in my cafetiere that I'm going to plunge shortly and my coffee cup, ready to chat with you guys about all of the projects that I have been working on in the last month. Let me just put this down somewhere safely. It's been raining so much lately, being very British, I know, and talking about the weather, and I just had to cut a little rose from my garden. It's a very aphid nibbled rose as usual, but it's my Buscabelle, which is a David Austin rose. It's coral and it positively glows in the dark. Normally I cut quite a lot of roses to keep indoors and flowers in general. It smells really nice and yeah, it really is like perfume. I wouldn't know how to describe it, like honey and molasses, quite light and maybe pear-like. But yeah, normally I cut lots and lots of flowers to have indoors in my bedroom and the kitchen table here by my couch. But this last year, I guess, what with spending so much time at home in the pandemic, hiding away from illness, the pestilence, I guess I've been able to enjoy the flowers in their natural state on their stems outside, as this is a large patio door here. So I haven't been cutting them, but then I did notice that with all of the torrential downpours that we've been having, the flowers are getting quite mashed up and nasty. So it's really nice to have made the effort to actually bother to bring some flowers in. In this month's episode, I've been busy knitting, I've been busy sewing and stitching, and also I'm very happy to say that after a very long hiatus, Larder Life is going to be back because I've been back into dabbling around in my kitchen and garden, which I did quite a lot of last summer and kind of missed, to be honest with you. In many ways, July has been a very full-on month. There's just been a lot going on outside of crafts, but also I've been quite busy with design work. Stuff like that has been brewing along in the background, but it's really nice to have a few things to share with you now. Normally I find on these videos that when I say, oh, this is just going to be a short episode, I don't have that much to share, that's generally when I tend to go on and on and on, and just then when I'm editing I'm like, oh my goodness, how did that last so long? So let's just take it as it comes and I'll show you what I've got in my knitting basket. Stuff is already falling out. Last month's episode, in the June episode, I had way too many works in progress and I've managed to finish one of them. So this is the framework bralette by Jessie May. I'm not going to put it on, that I had nearly finished last month, and it's knit out of a cotton DK blend. It's like a recycled cotton and recycled synthetic blend that I was quite excited about. And my plan was to wear it for yoga. And yeah, I guess I spoke about it a bit last time, but I've been wearing it, I wore it quite a bit as soon as I cast it off. And there was quite a lot of finishing to do. There were a lot of ends to stitch in, you know, one for every strap and where the join was and all of that kind of business. And I mentioned a little while back, I think it was at the beginning of the year when I knitted a woolly vest, I said, oh, I'm not quite sure why everyone's so into Jessie May patterns. I was just curious, you know, it wasn't really intended to be a criticism. I was just like, oh, why is everyone so into it, especially like knitting wool bras? People suggested I did it in cotton and that I had a go for myself. And I think having knit one of her patterns, I can kind of see why. I think it's the way in her pattern writing. She's quite straightforward about the body and about the shape and size of breasts, essentially, because, you know, she does have a bunch of little bras. I've only knit one of her patterns. And yeah, I think she's just quite frank about it, and the way that she encourages you just to go ahead and take your own measurements, to try things on and figure it out for yourself. And that's definitely an attitude towards the body and making clothing for your own body that I would certainly be happy to promote and encourage, really. I've got to say that there were things in the pattern that I, you know, as someone who has been trained in pattern cutting, that I didn't quite 100% agree with. For example, her instructions to shape the cups on the front and on the back, so that it's just this kind of V-shaped business. Triangles for the front and the back. Those triangles are shaped exactly the same, and obviously that's, you know, you don't have, as I always say, you don't have boobs on your back. You've got boobs on your front, if you're a human, probably. Well, maybe you don't have any boobs on your front, you know, if you've had a mastectomy or whatever, but you definitely don't have them on your back. You've got shoulder blades on your back, which are a totally different shape and projection and have different mass and so on and so forth. And because, you know, when you have the breast on the front, that's, you know, the rounding that comes up, but fabric has to then grow up and stretch up around it. So basically you need more fabric and shaping at the front than the back. So as per usual, I did all of my own modifications, went off-piste on the pattern. I think I followed her instructions for like the double cup height, because when I knitted it first, it literally like barely covered my nipple. It was mental. So then I did the double cup height, and I don't know, she kind of writes in the pattern, oh, this is more modest, but I don't think it's really more modest. It's just that, you know, there wouldn't be much point of wearing it at all, basically, because I'd essentially be wearing like a pair of braces or suspenders, as you say in America. So that was a bit weird. So then I also decreased more at the back than at the front on the cups, on the triangles. So there's just, I can't quite remember how I did it. I normally just improvise on the needles. But you can see here, hopefully, that there's just a bit more fabric on one side of things than there is on the other. And that just, you know, allows a bit more fabric to go around the shape of the body and the mass of the body. I did go down several needle sizes to knit the ribbed band, but unfortunately it still doesn't, you know, actually conform to the shape of my body enough. She's got this thing in the pattern where she says if you want to wear it as a bra, then stitch an elastic channel on to actually have support. But I just find that it's just, the ribbing is just too floppy. It just doesn't suck in enough. I guess that could be because it's cotton, you know, it might be different with wool. But I think personally, I think it's more to do with the actual fabric construction and like having rib stretching out. You know, you just wanted to have, I think really you needed to have a fabric type that is very inelastic under the bust so that it hugs the rib cage. So this is all of my thoughts about, you know, pattern cutting, engineering, body shape, and all of that kind of business that I just can't help myself. Every now and then I, you know, obviously knit other people's patterns, and I just find myself feeling really critical about things. And yeah, that's how it is. It's obviously everybody is different, but I think that when I'm making stuff, I just can't help thinking about movement and sort of how the movement of the body should be reflected in the movement of fabric and so on and so forth. And again, as I said, I do have a background in pattern cutting, so this is something that I had to think about, you know, very carefully, like previously when I was doing my bachelor's degree and, you know, for my old job and stuff like that. And I think it's kind of interesting with the world of self-publishing patterns, both knitting, crochet and sewing, is that a lot of people have come to it from a hobby perspective and they're learning from the doing of the craft, as opposed to sort of like studying it formally. And so I think that, you know, when you're coming from different backgrounds, you're just bringing quite different things to the patterns that you're creating. But also that sometimes, you know, when you take tips and tricks and methods from a professional workroom and, you know, the sort of more professional ways of doing things that might be a bit more tried and tested, and sometimes, you know, they've got ways of approaching it, you know, garment construction that you might not have considered. Which is why I think that one of the best ways to learn is to, you know, be very, very observant, and also to critically analyse other garments from as many different sources as possible. Not only ones that you've made yourself and, you know, different hand knitting designers, but also shop bought clothing and clothing from different types of stores, you know, different grades. Rummaging through people's wardrobes is a good way of doing that. Swapping clothes, borrowing clothes, and really opening everything up and examining and kind of thinking, oh, why is it like this and why is it like that? And then trial and error and testing things out. So I'm really glad that I knit the Jessie May pattern. I can definitely see why she's so popular as a designer. I really enjoy what she's doing. But would I knit another one of hers again? Probably not. Just because I can't seem to switch off this, you know, thinking mind of mine. And what I realised, you know, I kind of realised for a little while actually, is that the amount of modifications that I make to knitting patterns, it just feels like I should just work on writing my own, which is going to take me along to the next project. So I wanted to come up with a yoke sweater design, actually a couple, and there's one that I can't really talk about very much on YouTube at the moment, one design project, because it's currently secret. But if you are a patron, then I am blogging about this quite frankly and openly. I have permission from the person I'm collaborating with. So I'm blogging about the whole process of designing this secret sweater, really from beginning to end, from the very first conversation about the project, all the way through to the finished piece. I'm currently, you know, maybe not around halfway through the process, so we'll see. Just take this moment to plunge my coffee. So there's a secret yoke project going on in the background that I'm not talking about on YouTube, but there's also another yoke project which I will be documenting, which is this textured yoke. So since we last caught up, I've managed to whip up quite a lot of a sweater. So it's a top-down yoke, currently attached to everything. And yeah, I've got pretty far over the last couple of weeks. I think it was like a week to crunch the numbers, a week to do the yoke, then the body and the sleeves came down. And as you can see, it's a cropped sweater and it's pretty loose. It's got a really nice bobbly wobbly texture. And it's got quite a lot of shaping into it. So it's going to have nice unusual sleeves. And the whole idea about this sweater was that it would be loose and comfortable and almost boxy, but without actually being a box. So I was able to put into practice all of the kind of thoughts that I've been having about shaping and sweater construction and sweater shapes and body shapes and so on and so forth. And then, I'm just going to pour myself some coffee, and then rather than, you know, altering other people's patterns and getting annoyed about the fact that we don't have boobs on our back, you know, just put all of that stuff into practice on my own sweater. And because it was a top-down yoke sweater, or it is, and that's the construction shape, I'm able to try it on as I go. And I don't know what it is about me, you know, I'm a confident person, but I just kept trying it on and then feeling surprised that things worked out, or feeling surprised that they did work out as I intended them to be. And I think I mentioned this a couple of episodes ago about my pink sweater that I'm designing, that is currently, you know, lost in the depths of number crunching and grading and computer work. It's not at an exciting point at all right now. That coffee is really hot and really yummy. Yeah, so I don't know why I'm being surprised that, like, I'm trying it on and it's working. But there you go, I am. Maybe I'm just sharing that with you just as a way of kind of demonstrating that, you know, sometimes our confidence level ebbs and flows. You know, I'm not always so egocentric as to be like, oh, my way is always right, but actually I try and stay quite open to failure and change. And fortunately, very fortunately, knitting is also amenable and open to failure and change, because you can always just rip it out. You can do alterations afterwards, do a little bit of surgery if ripping it out isn't appropriate at that moment. And that's, you know, totally fine, and I'm totally up for it. So when it comes to typical yoke sweater construction, they kind of assume that the top half of your body is like a cone. A traffic cone, but a cone with a kind of slower slope. So, you know, it is still a cone, but it's kind of, rather than completely like the angle goes all the way down, you know, there is a bit of a curve to the cone, but still very much a cone. Also, there's a weird assumption a lot of the time that your head is, you know, like a lollipop on a stick, just kind of, you know, hovering at the top of the traffic cone. Sometimes there's the assumption that your arms are sausages. Sometimes there's shaping in the sleeve, not always. Sometimes there's shaping in the body, not always. But that's not true. And basically, one of the, you know, easiest ways to modify a yoke sweater is to add neck shaping. So often I add short row shaping up the back neck here, because your neck sits lower at the front of your body than on the back. You know, this, your clavicle here, that's the base of your neck at the front, and the base of your neck at the back is at the top bone of the spine here. So you can see there's a slope. So you need to add that slope to your necklines of your jumpers. You know, that's just human anatomy. And sometimes I've seen in patterns like they'll add short rows to the back of the yoke here, and the idea is that, oh, it pushes the yoke up here, but it's also adding a wedge of fabric here, and hopefully, you know, you don't have, you know, like a distorted, you know, spine here. Hopefully. If you do have, you know, a small hump in your spine, then yeah, sure, add it there. But you know, for the sort of, I'm trying not to say the word hunchback, I guess, but it just strikes me as really odd that we'd add a wedge of extra fabric here when, you know, we don't have a huge mound of, you know, extra flesh, bone and muscle shaping there. But what we do have is more height at the back of our neck, so like the shaping should be there. So there's just stuff like that that I'm playing around with. And you know, another thing that you often see on sleeve patterns, and this is something that I talked about quite a bit in my video about tracking increases and decreases. There's a neat little tutorial there about reading your knitting, so do check that one out if you haven't done already. But I talk about sleeve shaping and the fact that, you know, your arm, I'm not talking about people who are extremely, extremely slender, or who have very, very developed muscles, or whatever, you know, different scenarios, but really just the middle of the road, like from your, you know, round your top arm, through your bicep to your elbow, that gets slightly smaller. But then from your elbow to your wrist, you have a big decrease in the circumference. So why is it that sleeve patterns in a lot of knitted garments, you know, evenly stagger the decreases across the whole sleeve? That does not reflect the anatomy of the human arm. And you know, when you get sewing patterns for a sleeve, you know, you always cut the sleeve relatively, you know, wide around the top, and then it quickly narrows down towards the cuff, or maybe it doesn't because it's going to be gathered up into a cuff, you know, on a shirt or a blouse or something like that. Anyway, so just lots of stuff like that that I'm playing around with, alongside playing around shaping, detail, texture. And this garment is going to be released under the Crimson Stitchery. So as I said, the idea is that it's boxy but not a box. So even though, you know, it's very wide, you know, there is some waist shaping, because, you know, the way that the fat and the body mass is distributed, you know, there is narrowing because the rib cage narrows down from the fullness of the chest. Even if you have a belly, you know, generally going to narrow a bit here. I realise that I'm wearing this 1950s dress which exaggerates the narrowing of the ribcage, but there's still... So yeah, I don't know why knitting patterns assume that we're all just a bunch of, you know, cylinders, cones and sticks and lollipop heads. I think that you can get away with quite a lot with positive ease and negative ease because of the stretch of the fabric, but you can still have a nice loose sweater but incorporate some shaping so that it's flattering and hangs and falls on the body really, really carefully, whilst taking into account drape. I think a good example is that, you know, often Asian clothing is cited when we think about clothing that isn't shaped with tailoring and darts and so on and so forth. But once I tried to cut a kimono using rectangles, because I'd read in a book that it was all formed out of rectangles because Japanese cloth is woven on very narrow looms and they just whip together a bunch of rectangles. And it looked really stiff and awkward. And then I had a vintage kimono that was falling apart. So I looked at the pieces of it and it actually had shaping all around the collar. And I think that was partly cut in and that was partly down to just wear and tear, like the cloth had shaped itself around the body and actually moulded slightly, sort of a mixture of the two. Similarly to that, with 1920s dresses, as you know, in fashion history, you read that everything was cut on the straight because it was, you know, emphasizing a sort of boyishness with the hip, you know, the straight line from the shoulder to the hip, as opposed to nipping in for the waist with femininity. So 1920s pattern cutting is meant to be all squares and so on. But again, I've deconstructed 1920s garments and they all had shaping. And when I tried to recreate it in you know, newer, stiffer fabrics, because it didn't have the drape and the wear around the body, it just didn't hang in the same way. I realise that I'm kind of glossing over quite a lot of stuff about period pattern cutting, fashion history and historical dress, and well, fashion history in general. This is my background for any new viewers. I'm a dress specialist academically. So I always love to put it into practice because ultimately clothes are not divorced from our experience of the world. Oh, the rain's just stopped and the sun's coming in and out of the clouds, so prepare for lighting to become a bit strange. I was just thinking about my thoughts again about shaping and the kind of oversimplification of the human body when it comes to garments, and I actually recast my thoughts because I thought actually when it comes to making, maybe the experience of the creation takes over and the shaping of garments becomes deliberately simplified and oversimplified, almost as if not to put people off, especially if people are beginners. Or maybe it's just that within knitting, as opposed to, you know, fashion design, if you like, maybe the focus has just been much more on the fabric surface and kind of fabric qualities as opposed to the shape around the body. But part of me feels more inclined to say that when it comes to hand knitting, it's sort of about being able to just knit almost without thinking about too much about shape, as if shape would be something that puts people off. I guess I'm thinking about like encouraging people to make garments by saying it's not that difficult because you don't want to intimidate people. I'm thinking about Elizabeth Zimmerman and her sort of percentage systems of garment construction, which I haven't explored that much. I think I borrowed one of her books, is it Knitting in Plain English, or was it the other one, Knitting Without Tears? One of them from the library ages ago. I enjoyed it. I don't have my own copy. I also really enjoyed Maggie Rigetti, who gets talked about a little bit less than Elizabeth Zimmerman these days, but I loved her very no-nonsense approach to knitting as well. And I guess that I have my own no-nonsense approach when it comes to shape and a very frank attitude towards the body. Which is something that I've explored on this channel with my video, Making Clothing to Embrace the Body That You Have. Yeah, I'd be really interested to get your thoughts on this matter. I can feel my thinking mind, as I keep saying, really coming into action. And I suspect that's because I'm actually on a summer break from my PhD. I got to a point with it earlier this year where I was just quite happy never to, I was about to say I was happy never to step into an academic building ever again, but they were all closed because of the pandemic. But now that I've had a rest, I can really feel like that's done me the world of good, because I'm starting to think about all of this stuff quite naturally and enjoy it. Whereas before, honestly, I was quite ready to just, I don't know, I guess it's just a point that you get to within a PhD. Hopefully soon I'll go back in the autumn term and hopefully I'll be ready to start writing up, fingers crossed, with any luck. And then that will be like the last year and a half or so of a PhD. So yeah. Now, what else did I want to say? Oh, I thought I'd mention the yarn. I haven't mentioned the yarn. It's a Debbie Bliss. It's like a cashmere tweed. I think it's 5% cashmere, and it's 4-ply, and it's really, really nice. It's really light. I've knit all of this from 2 balls. I know it's a cropped small sweater, but even so, it's so light. The fabric texture is really light, and I love how it, you know, it folds up to barely anything at all. You can just imagine one more fold when there's a second sleeve. The sleeves are going to be dramatic, so yeah, it's going to be a bit more fabric really. And the tweed is really nice colours. So we've got a perfect shade of dark red. We've got bright crimson, moss green, navy blue, bright blue, tweed flecks, and I think there's a bit of dark grey, almost black. So really a perfect pairing, because I feel like sometimes with the tweed net, sometimes the colours are a bit weird, but this is really good, and it feels just really nice and soft. And it's a single ply, so it's got that kind of homespun appearance almost, because there's a bit of thick and thin going on with the single ply and the tweed. But it's very, very soft, like totally able to wear it next to skin without getting worried. So yeah. Next up is my crochet granny square bag. Now, I'm showing this to you because I'm really proud that I've woven in the ends of one side. As anyone who's made a crochet granny square from leftovers before will know, you just get stuck with all of the ends and it's not that fun. So I think I've done about half of the other side. So yeah, I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to cut a lining out of a very thin woven fabric so that the bag doesn't stretch out. So there's quite some work to go on this still, especially as I may put a pocket into the lining. I'll probably do a red lining, and then I'll do a handle. So yeah, quite a bit of stuff to go on this still, but I absolutely love it. I can't wait to, you know, go to the shops with this, even though it's going to be a little bit heavier than just a plastic bag. But I absolutely love it. Let's go through all the squares one more time for your viewing pleasure. All with scraps. I haven't touched any of my other projects apart from what I've shown you, because I got very preoccupied with the designing. But it's been nice to have this on the go. I can't wait to finish more things. Kind of nice to have a few projects that I'm sort of at a good point where I can finish them, and then I can feel all the finished objects coming through. Sewing. I haven't talked about sewing for ages because I haven't done any sewing in absolutely ages, but I had a big birthday in July. Big birthday came up and we had a big party with big jugs of cocktails. Was very worse for wear after that. And the theme was, you must wear gold. I wore gold, everyone else wore gold. My partner was upset because he didn't have anything gold already. So I whipped up him a little vest out of some leftover fabric, because I had this gold lurex jersey with like a purple, one of the threads in it somewhere is purple. It's a machine knit. I'm not quite sure how they've put it together. It looks quite complicated. If I look up close, fabric construction looks really complicated, and I don't know a lot about machine knitted and machine woven fabrics, to be honest with you. But it's sparkly gold and purple, and it's just a little vest. I did fish this out of the laundry pile, so it's a bit crumpled. But that's that really. It's using a vest pattern that I have used for him quite a lot of times before, which is just traced around a shop bought vest. So he wore that, looked very sweet. And then because I had the sewing machine out, I found that I had a couple of half-made masks that I'd cut out much earlier in the year. So I decided to stitch those up, which are here. So this is from a leftover dress that I made my grandma for her. Oh gosh, I think I made it for her to wear it to a cousin's wedding, and I think I was 19 or 20, so 10 years ago. Oh my goodness. So that lovely dress with a nice little salmon lining, and I went for the ear straps, and then I had also cut out a plain pink mask just because I really liked this fabric at home. Oh, the sun's gone again. And restrictions have eased or relaxed or ended, who knows, for now in England. But it was quite nice to have a couple of fresh masks. We still have to use them on public transport here in London. And to be honest with you, a lot of shops ask that you still wear them, especially small little boutiques or independent shops. Yeah, which I'm more than happy to do. And just when it's kind of crowded around, like in bars and stuff like that, I'm still wearing them. So it's quite nice to have a couple of fresh ones. And I really enjoyed having my sewing machine out, doing the sewing, making the vest, making the mask was such a nice thing to do. And yeah, just as I mentioned, having sort of had some downtime and time off in the early summer, it feels really good to be able to reconnect to the things that I like to do and actually enjoy doing them. I was very, very burnt out this year. I alluded to it, I've alluded to it on the podcast. I'm not going to go into any more details because it's not really appropriate. But yeah, suffice it to say that things are not always as they seem on the internet, and that one's real life is filled with complexity. Larder life. So one thing that happens when I'm happy is that I find myself just naturally doing things that are better for me, like exercise and cooking for myself. And I've finally started another batch of sourdough starter. So I got really into this, and then at one point, I think it got too hot in last autumn and the starter died. And then over the winter it was too cold indoors. I don't know, I didn't manage to keep one alive, but I've managed to start a brand new one from scratch, and I've made I think 3 loaves so far, and they've all been really good. Just back to normal and back to trying to think of what to do with the starter. And I'm using a mix of plain flour and like a whole grain, very rough kind of spelt kind of thing, that's like almost greenish and very dry, and the starter really likes that, so I'm doing a mix of the two. Got back into lacto fermentation. I've got my carrots on the go, which is really good, and yeah, just sort of making things again, which is really, really nice. So let me put that back down. I don't have a conversational threads topic with you today, but I think we really got into it in the knitting basket section, talking about garment shaping and the body. So please do weigh in down below in the comments with what your possible thoughts and theories might be about body shaping and the lack thereof, and why and how and wherefore. One last little thing that I do want to share, just because it relates to some stuff that I've shared in the past on the channel, where in the past I've been, you know, concerned about social media addiction and phone and screen addiction and overuse, because it's a real thing, and it especially has been through increased screen time and Zoom time through the pandemic. And then recently, you may have seen the breaking news story about a new phone hacking scandal. I don't know what you want to call it, plot. Yeah, don't know what you want to call it, which affects like Apple phones and WhatsApp. And in the UK, or at least in the circles that I move in and everyone that I know, WhatsApp is pretty commonly used for messaging. and you end up in a lot of groups and so on and so forth. So the idea that, yeah, they could access everything on your phone and your contact list and so on just by not even like making you click on a fraudulent link, but just because you have WhatsApp installed on your phone. I'm going to leave the news article about this in the down bar here on YouTube. I'm not making this up, I'm paraphrasing the news article. So that really spooked me. And there had already been like a data leak kind of scandal or worry about WhatsApp last year, so I deleted it from my phone. And I was quite aware that this would probably irritate a lot of people, because it's like, oh, you have to send me a normal text message or an email, and I never check my emails. Sorry to anyone that emails me, like I check them a couple of times a week, and I'm so loath to do that because it's full of junk mail that I can't seem to get rid of. And it, you know, it is a real shame about contacting friends who live abroad, don't live in the same country as me, friends and family. But if I really need to, I can send them an email. And what I found that just by merit of not being on WhatsApp and not having so many groups, suddenly I was actually finally able to curb this phone addiction thing, you know, this like constantly looking for the phone and checking it and looking at it all the time and picking it up to see if you had any new messages or notifications. Actually more than you know, I'd already switched off a lot of notifications and so on and so forth, but I just decided to delete that app, and it's made a really big difference. And I feel that my life is much quieter and calmer, and I can be much more focused on things like reading, knitting, doing tasks without going to the phone, because you don't constantly have nonsense popping up, especially when you're in group chats, even if you've switched off notifications. So I just thought I'd share that little anecdote. I think that in another life I must have been someone like living in a very self-sufficient manner, but somehow not in a rural setting. Like, definitely I'm a townie, though I like being by the sea, but there's so much when it comes to that sort of switching off, you know, idea that really appeals to me. And obviously with all of the home crafts and all of the hand making and so on, like there's so much that interests me that actually relates to that kind of like self-sufficiency, living in the wild sort of thing. But you know, look at me, I also love colour and pattern, and living in a city or near a large city and a multicultural place is extremely important to me. And whenever I've lived in places that are not multicultural, you know, as a minority ethnic person, I have felt very uncomfortable and often been made to feel very unwelcome. So yeah, just not really trying to go anywhere with this thought, but it's just sort of laughing because you have the sort of image of like what it means to live off the land or have this like self-sufficiency ideal, and often it's very like American, living in the countryside, being really cut off, having your pantry and all of your pickle jars and carving your wooden spoons, which viewers from last year will remember that I very much enjoyed trying out. I don't know, making your own baskets, pickling your own eggs, who knows what not, and that just looks so far away from, you know, me and what I'm actually interested in. But there's so much of it that is appealing and doesn't necessarily need to reflect, it doesn't necessarily need to reflect one lifestyle or another, but really what it's about at its core is skills, and giving individuals skills that will empower them to be self-reliant and also you know, just be able to cope with life in general. So all of that from my decision to delete WhatsApp. Link to the scary news article down below, currently becoming attached to all of the knitting needles, and it's starting to rain again, so I think that's a good point to wrap up this month's video. Thank you so much for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, please do hit the thumbs up button down below and drop me a comment, and feel free to respond to any of these thoughts. Remember that we do have a Ravelry group for the Crimson Stitchery, and I also write a monthly newsletter, and I post on Instagram around once a week or once a fortnight. So just trying to find ways to, you know, connect with people through this exciting digital world that then, oh, the rain, doesn't like allow the kind of digital surveillance world that we're in, you know, to sort of take over. I'm trying to find my way through it, and, you know, let me know how it's going for you as well. And another huge, absolutely massive thank you to all of my supporters over on Patreon for continuing to support the Crimson Stitchery through your monthly membership subscriptions. If that is something that tickles your fancy, do head over to patreon.com/the Crimson Stitchery. And a shout out to my patrons who've joined at the Crimson Queens tier. Thank you so much for your support at the highest level over the last month. Thank you to Shelley, Jamie Pung, and thank you, Angie. Through your support, through your financial contributions, I am really keeping this alive, and I've been finding ways this year to make it something that I will be doing long term, and it's really very much thanks to you guys. So my gratitude extends to you. A lot of that is because since I've been doing much more designing under my own name and label, the Crimson Stitchery, you know, that is a lot of unphotogenic screen time spent sorting stuff out and the necessary admin of running this small studio business. And so having people around that are interested in what I'm doing and getting glimpses of the things that are going on behind the scenes before they're 100% ready to launch has just been absolutely wonderful, and such a great experience, and I hope that you guys are enjoying it as much as I have been. Design wise, there is going to be a new design coming out in August. I have a shawl pattern, and there is actually a little sneaky preview on the video screen, like the what's it called, the thumbnail, the YouTube video thumbnail. You'll have seen a red shawl. That is the design. I very quietly just placed that there and very subtly didn't really reply to people that asked me where they could get that pattern because it's up and coming. So I'm really excited about launching that and continuing to work on things in the background. So signing off for now, I hope very, very much that wherever you are in this late July, August 2021, that you are doing well and that you are finding things to bring you happiness and calm despite everything that continues to go on and all of the uncertainty that we have been, you know, learning to deal with all around the world. Okay. Thanks so much for watching. Take care. Bye-bye.